It's interesting, and I've wondered this very thing. I've wrestled with this in the past too. You're kind of mixing stress with strain to some extent, or really stress with stimulus. It's the same stress on the body, but it's not providing the same stimulus. So that's kind of where I'm going to go with this.
Cool, yeah.
And I know someone, and this is the misconception, and I think I've even perpetuated this myself in maybe years past, is that if you have more oxygen to work with, then you have a greater work capacity, and this leads to greater adaptations. But that's kind of where it jumps tracks. More oxygen does yield greater work capacity, assuming you're aerobically fit enough, but it doesn't necessarily stimulate more adaptations. You can do more work, but it might not be enough of a challenge to make your muscles realize they need to do more.
Got it.
So it might not provide that necessary stimulus.
So it's not like just a direct, like, because I have more, it will be more.
Nope.
Got it, yeah.
Nope. And the potential for more work is just that. It's potential. Doesn't mean you're going to be able to do more work. You have to have the muscular capabilities to do it. You have to have the mitochondria. You have to have the oxidative enzymes. There have to be certain things in place, and those are adaptations that take place over time, assuming they're provided a sufficient stimulus. So again, that's where we're going. So
Chad's busting out handwritten notes on this one.
I started scribbling things, and then it evolved, and now I'm going to have to rely on my notes because there's just too much to type in.
Good, okay.
Yeah, it'll go quick.
I'm going to lean back and drink my coffee. I love this.
Cool. All right. Good. Because there's much to share.
I'm barely going to interrupt you.
That was a point for those that don't know.
Okay, I could use the breather here and there. Okay, so let's just be clear that when it's competition, that's when we want to exploit work capacity. With workouts, it's not so much about work capacity, it's about training stimulus. Okay, so to reiterate that a second or a third time, whatever. So first, let's talk about what we're trying to accomplish with the whole live high end of things, and then we'll get to the train low. So when you're at high altitude, you're in hypoxic conditions. So the air's thinner, there's less oxygen concentration per volume of air, and this leads to certain things in the body. The kidneys produce more erythropoietin. That erythropoietin goes to the red blood cells and produces more marrow and more hemoglobin. So EPO. In the marrow, it produces more red blood cells and more hemoglobin mass. So you not only have more cells to carry oxygen and shuttle out CO2, but you also have more of the necessary protein that clings to those molecules. And in the end, you increase your oxygen carrying capacity, and this can lift your hematocrit at the same time. So more red blood cells per volume of blood. And this increased oxygen carrying capacity is good, again, if you have the muscular capability to utilize the incoming oxygen. If you don't have the capillary beds, if you haven't undergone the angiogenesis necessary to stimulate those new blood vessels and so that you can impart more oxygen to the muscle. If you don't have the oxidative enzymes to use the incoming oxygen and whatever substrate, the fat or the glucose, it doesn't really matter how much oxygen you can push to the muscle. You also have to be able to utilize it. So this increase in aerobic work capacity is a potential. It's not an automatic. Okay. Cool. So erythropoiesis in the case of high elevation is really the name of the game. We want production of more red blood cells. So and that's all good and fine, but like I just said, you also have to have the muscular capacity or the capabilities, and that is why we train low. That's why we train at a sufficient or a low enough elevation to where we can push enough oxygen to the muscles to actually challenge the existing mitochondria. Because if we're pushing oxygen to only a handful of the mitochondria, then what's the stimulus to say I need more mitochondria? I need greater aerobic work capacity. I need greater proliferation or mitochondrial biogenesis. It's not there. So if we don't have enough air to even elicit that or provide that stimulus, then we're not going to get the eventual adaptation.
Right.
Okay. So the stress. Let's see. So if we have a low oxygen concentration, we're effectively blunting the intended stimulus. Right. So that's put simply. And what happens is we get a detraining effect. So instead of we're exerting more stress on the body, but in terms of training adaptation, we're actually detraining in the process. Yes, our red blood cells go up, and we now have a greater oxygen carrying capacity, but our muscular capabilities are on the decline. So you're kind of shooting yourself in the foot. And then, so just to kind of drive this home in terms of the efficacy of the whole live high, train low approach, it was back in 2006, John Peter Werlin and colleagues recruited 10 elite athletes and over 24 days, and that's an important point to remember, 24 days. We're not talking about a 1 week or a 2 week modification. This is 3 weeks or plus of living and training at high altitude. And in particular, they lived at 2,500 meters, which is about 8,200 feet. And that seems to be the sweet spot. Somewhere between 2,000 and 2,500 meters seems to be the sweet spot for altitude acclimatization. When they trained at either 1,800 meters or 1,000 meters, and that's roughly 5,900 feet, roughly 3,300 feet. And the difference being when they're at 1,800 meters, they did their low or moderate intensity work. That was about 85% of their training. Mm-hmm. The other 15% was comprised of high intensity interval training, HIIT, and that was done at 1,000 meters. So it's still not sea level. They're still not in the most plentiful oxygen or the richest air, but still plenty of oxygen to do the work. And then what they saw was about a 5% bump in both their red blood cell volume and their hemoglobin mass. So true, they did in fact enhance their oxygen carrying capacity. And because they did it right and they trained low, not just lived high, they also improved their sea level performance by, I think, a similar percentage. But either way, it was measurable, and these are already elite level athletes.
Yeah, I think it was their actual times were 2 to 5% faster.
Yeah, which in elites is a big deal.
Well, especially in that amount of time period. I want to say 2%.
And that's the other thing. That may seem like a long time, and it is for people who are on a just a regular day-to-day schedule and on a budget and have family and other obligations where they can't spend three plus weeks at elevation.
Yeah, it's tough to do.
So,
but this is too. They got to drive down.
Yeah,
it's both.
Yeah, and they're
true.
Yeah, so it's even more time.
Yeah, so they're spending a lot of time focused on one particular thing, performance improvement and this particular type of adaptation.
There are rare spots in the world where you can kind of pick and choose like that, right? Like even have access to terrain to be able to train and do that.
Yes.
Yeah, that's the other thing. You have to have a place where you can make all that gel.
I've talked about this before, but I was part of a study to test. To work out with more air than sea level.
Yeah.
So that at the gym you
got to comment on that.
Yeah,
interesting one.
I want that. They were trying to test if it was safe for people, and I was one of the people. They're like, "Is this safe?"
Yes, it was safe.
You were a lab
did it
rat.
yield improvement because
so it was single blind, and I was doing treadmill tests, and when I had the extra oxygen, my gosh, it was. I think I was at 26%. I think sea level's 24%, and I was at 26, and it was just amazing. And we all
in
feel
terms
it
of
too.
amazing, what
in
the
the
feeling
moment, in
for the
terms of
same
performance
for the same pace. And I did there was a step test for the same pace. It was so much easier. Just like when we go to sea level,
your RPE was lower.
My RPE was lower for the same pace in the treadmill.
Yeah, so it felt a little easier to go the same fast
A
pace.
lot easier.
Just
like sea level. You guys sea level. Watch it huge.
And that's all good and fine. But if you look back at Kilding, and I couldn't find the year on this. I did find the study or my notes on the study, but I couldn't find the year. But it's KILDING. This is the author of the study, amongst others. They use hyperoxic training to do the very thing that Nate's describing here, and it effectively lowered the HIIT-related improvements. So because they saturated the muscle with oxygen, the stimulus, once again, wasn't sufficient enough to say, need more mitochondria. They were providing plentiful oxygen, and because of it, it actually blunted the stimulus.
Interesting.
So going deep.
I don't know. I don't have a whole lot of details on this. I tried to look it up this morning. I kind of ran out of time. But the fact is, it may have improved performance in the moment, but it didn't increase the necessary stimulus for further adaptation.
Interesting.
So I'd like to look at that study because for watts, it's really easy to measure our performance, right, with watts.
Totally.
And I would think that I would want to do my VO2 max efforts down at sea level, and I can do 30 more watts for. I've taken when we did it in sea level, I have a huge benefit. I've done my 3-minute power for 10 minutes at sea level.
Yeah, that's an increase in performance, but again, not something that would spur adaptation necessarily. It seems like an artificial alteration.
I think so. I'm drawing a parallel in my mind with this to back in the day with motorcycles and carburetors. I know they're fuel injected now, but when I was growing up, it was all carbureted. So you decided how much oxygen went in, you decided how much fuel went in, and then it would, if you hit the right mixture, you would get the right amount of combustion, and then things would work right? And I feel like it's interesting because when you're talking about performance, that's where you want to go. But the interesting thing is adaptation, right? And so I wonder,
that's in the moment. But what about the after effects?
Exactly right.
We have that study that shows that it did increase their performance over 28 days.
Living high.
Yep.
Living high,
training low. Yeah.
Yes, but we're not talking about saturating the muscle in the moment with extra oxygen.
Yeah, you're talking about that, isolating that variable. Yeah.
Maybe I'm confused because I don't know how my body knows the difference is if I live high and then I do 1 hour VO2 max workout.
That's the difference between hypoxia and muscle saturation. So the amount of oxygen in the air versus the amount of oxygen being utilized at the muscle.
Yeah.
Two different things.
Yeah.
And a finer point, but an important one.
if I'm living at 8,000 feet and I drive down to sea level and do, or 55,000 feet like this.
I see what you're saying. Yeah, and they did get
performance from that, right?
Yes. Yeah.
I'm living at 8,000 feet, and then I put a mask on myself, and I get the same oxygen as 5,000 feet for those hour workouts, and they're intense, and I'm putting out more watts. I don't understand how there would be a difference between the outcome.
There wouldn't be.
Your body wouldn't know. Unless there's some kind of pressure thing that I don't.
Because these guys are still living at altitude, though. They're still gaining all the adaptations that come with the hypoxic environment up.
Yeah,
top.
I'm saying I'm living at 8,000 feet.
Yep. Yeah. You guys are both saying the same things. I mean, I'm a mediator right now.
No, I hear it too. I know we're saying the same things.
Yeah, you're saying the same things. The point is that what Chad's getting at is whether, in terms of adaptations, what actually helps adaptation, does purely saturating the muscle with more oxygen help adaptation?
Yeah, I don't think that hyperoxic training is going to lead to
interesting thing.
faster bike riders.
Yeah.
I think the work has to increase, not just the oxygen.
And that's kind of the main takeaway. Let's get away from what's going on inside the muscle and then look back at Daniel's question, right? Because Daniel in this case is asking why train low? And the point of training low is
to provide a sufficient stimulus.
Yeah, exactly right.
You go harder.
Yep, you can go harder, you can do more, and you can, especially when you're talking about higher intensity.
You basically
training.
have to outpace your muscle's current demands. You have to make all the mitochondria scream for oxygen, and then basically deny it,
right?
Rather than provide insufficient oxygen so that you can't even recruit all the mitochondria, which is what happens when you're up at elevation.
And so that's the intent of training low. Just to be very literal with his question.
Yep. So what happens? You might think of, well, why can't I just always train low? Because I'm always going to do this, but there's so they've studied this a lot, and then so you get the benefits of the blood at 8,000 feet or high elevation. Even here, we get benefits.
Yeah.
You go low, you get the benefits to be able to do more work. It's a wash. It's like the percentage difference of improvement are the same, so it's a wash. So this is why the very best would be if you could live high and have all the blood, and then you train low and have all the work capacity, and you have to go hard. If you just do, to Chad's point, if you're at doing 300 watt 20-minute intervals at 8,000 feet, then you do 300 watt 20-minute intervals at sea level, you're not getting the benefit. Yeah. But if you can now, that 300 watts was all out, at sea level you can go 320 or 330, you'll get a benefit. And that's why, too, they have the people doing HIIT stuff, usually VO2 max, too. They really want to take advantage of that extra
exactly
air.
Right, yeah.
So this is also what we have an advantage. We lived in Truckee. Truckee's at 6,200 feet.
Yeah, Incline Village, right?
Yeah. That would be great. But there are mountain bike races and crits at sea level that we can travel to in the same day.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I actually did that last year where I did a bunch of sweet spot, and then my VO2 max workouts, I'm using air quotes, are these really intense on-off mountain bike races with not climbing.
Yeah, and you just saw improvement through the roof.
Training,
right?
Yeah, it's nice. So once a week, I could add a very, very intense ride. I mean, it's a race, right? But it's still, I'm getting pegged. And if you have that strategy, it's very unique, though.
Yeah.
Around the world to have to a place that's so close that you can actually drive down lower.
Yeah.
And then come back.
Yeah.
And on top of that, I mean, and I think you're kind of doing this if you can incorporate a little bit of heat stress into the whole mix.
Oh, yeah.
Which heat stress actually kind of goes the other way, where you train low, live high, train in low temperatures, and then not necessarily live in high temperatures, but expose yourselves to some additional heat after the fact. So a form of living at high temperatures. Then you get the bump in plasma volume on top of all of it. So really, all this hematologic, blood-related adaptation that's super beneficial to endurance performance.
Yeah.
I know. So I struggle with this. So we have the sauna here. And I want to use it every time, but it's just a time commitment. I'm thinking about just waiting. Actually, I should be using this week because we're going to Hawaii next week.
I thought the same thing. Just go sit in it, even if I don't tie it to workouts.
I know. I'm just going to wear this, the button-up shirt.
Gross. Just a sweaty mess.
But I think I was going to do it like we've talked about, maybe a week before my first mountain bike races. And it'll be snow on the ground in Reno, just to get that extra benefit.
And that's the key here, because we've talked a lot about sauna training and how it can benefit your performance in the heat. Well, sitting on a trainer, even with a fan, it still produces a ton of heat. I mean, there's a reason you're sweating. So there's still a lot of heat shock proteins. There's still a lot of the potential improvements in blood plasma. So all of those things still come with your workouts. We're just layering a little bit of icing on that cake.
Here's a study I'd like to see. With heat adaptation, we've seen that your short-term performance can increase, right? I want to know that if you do heat adaptation training and you do it for, 2 months, and then you compare to people who did the same training but didn't do that, and then you do a washout, like you do 2 weeks of just the standard training without any heat adaptation, and then you do a test, were the performances and the people that trained, like, were they able to go deeper?
Yeah.
People that trained with heat adaptation, did they have a better outcome?
Yeah.
That
Like a psychological adjustment? Or?
No, like physiological.
Okay.
So after you do a washout, so after all the plasma's back to normal, like, did that period of being able to go harder
deliver additional
physiologically
adaptation?
Because the plasma volume change is going to
so
long gone.
it's just like this training low, like being able to go deeper for 8 weeks,
which smacks of psychology, the deeper part.
being able to put out more watts. Yeah.
Okay.
So that's I'd like
measuring it in terms of performance.
Yeah, exactly. To see like if that 8 weeks.
Sure.
I would think that it would. It was just like this. You have greater work capacity.
Yeah.
So you should be able to. So why shouldn't I be doing this year round? But I don't know. That has to be proven. That's my hypothesis.
If there's anybody that just wants to do studies at our whim, we have plenty of ideas. So we throw them out at all times.
Yep, and I do want to make this is kind of off topic.
Sure.
It's on topic, but it's a bit of a tangent. So low brain oxygenation. We're always talking about muscle oxygenation, but there's also low oxygen to the brain, and this has particular effects also. It can limit basically central drive. So how much your brain will allow your body to work, and
That's why we give up.
yeah, and to an extent, there are forms of adaptation that come along with this, but this central fatigue can actually pull down your work capacity in a kind of an artificial way. I mean, it's a protective mechanism, really. But if you have to compete in high elevation, familiarizing yourself with this sort of brain fog and racing through it can actually be, or it has the potential to be a competitive advantage. So it's something worth considering. I mean, most people I think would probably try to avoid doing workouts in this sort of brain hazy state, but there is a potential competitive advantage.
Yeah, I felt that at Leadville, and you can see that when people are going up Columbine. Not a lot of sharp thinking going on up at that point, right? We're all a little sideways.
Understandably.
Yeah, it's called grit.
But if you've done it before,
People have grit, people don't. That's what you're talking
think about it. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, if you've
Yeah.
done it before and you're familiar with it, it doesn't affect you the same way. You know, you don't it maybe doesn't get to you quite the same way because it's at least a little familiar.
I'm almost the opposite. Like the first time is good. The second time, like my grit level goes down.
Really?
Because I
Then
know
you're afraid of it.
exactly. I'm like, this is going to be so much worse at the finish.
It's really interesting. It'd be, once again, another study idea. It'd be wonderful to be able to separate out like psychological, like or the effect of a person being afraid of what elevation is going to do to them versus what it physically does to them.
They have ways to.
And,
they have some pretty cruel studies.
Yeah,
methods
sure.
to figure out how to.
Because there are plenty of people that I know that they've raced enough in elevation to have a lot of experience, and there are other people just like them, whatever else in terms of where they live. But sure, we're all individual and we all react differently to elevation, that sort of stuff. But there are a lot of people that I know, regardless of the physical side of things, I know that mentally they really kind of shoehorn themselves into a box with elevation. They're kind of like, I'm stuck in here and I can't do well at elevation. And I wonder how much of it is, once again, the psychological effect. Like you said, some people, they go through it once and they're strong. Other people, it hits them, and then after that, they're afraid of going back into that.
Yeah, I mean, same thing could be said with workouts. You do a particularly hard workout, and it just crushes you, and you know you got to do it again or a harder version of it again. You're already mentally checked out.
Builds up fear.
To Jonathan's point, like we have the opposite. I feel like I perform worse at elevation, but better at sea level, and you feel like you don't get the same benefit at sea level, but you get not the same
lesser detriment.
At elevation. And I wonder if there's anything psychological in that, or if it's physiological, because our power meters and performance, we race so much together.
Yeah.
That do you notice at sea level I'm like closer to you?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. You are like, it's like if we were to move the same race, even though you couldn't do that, you would be much closer at sea level than if we were up at elevation.
He drops me faster at elevation. That's pretty much it. But I don't know if that's something psychological with me or physiological.
Yeah, and that's the hard thing. We can't like separate and unwrap individually. It's really tough to do that.
Tease them.
You
tease
know.
them up.
In an ideal world, we all at least can manage the psychological component, but it's not just easy to manage. You can't just do that. That's part of the whole entire experience of training.
I'd like to think that I have more to gain at elevation and you have more to gain at sea level. We're just both bad.
Yeah, then we just need to be better.
If we just believe that, it'll happen.
That's what we'll do. I'll stick to it.
That's what it is.
If you like this video, you should subscribe to our channel. Maybe even give this video a like with a thumbs up and a comment down below.
If you want to see race analysis videos, you can click on it right over here.
And if you want to get your coaching questions answered, you can click on it right over here.
And if you want to become a faster cyclist, which you should go over to TrainerRoad.com. It'll make you faster. We promise. We guarantee it, right, Nate?
Guaranteed. Or your money back.
Yes, it's true, actually. We really will do that.
Yeah.